Hello and welcome to Conversations with Catholics. I am very honored today to be joined by the Uncharted Catholic Men, Craig and Jonah. What's going on, guys?
How you doing, Kevin? It's great to be here.
Great to be here.
I'm very happy to have both of you guys on. So I was just on your show a month ago, about a couple weeks, and we had a really good conversation. I've got a couple questions that I want to ask you guys, and then if you guys have questions for me, feel free to grill me. I think when I came on your show, I think I wound up really stealing the conversation at points, and we talked about the topics that I want to talk about. So I'm going to make sure to be a little bit more polite today than I was on your guys' show. But
people want to hear you more than they want to hear me anyway, so that's fine.
Well, hey, that might be true when it's your podcast, but now you're on mine, so now everyone wants to hear you. Sorry, you're not getting out of this easy. So I think a great place to start would be not everybody in my audience will be familiar with you, although I know that there is going to be decent overlap. Why don't you both kind of introduce yourselves, but I guess specifically, so I said Conversations with Catholics, so spoiler, you guys are Catholic, but I would love to hear your kind of your religious introduction. So Craig, if you want to go first, then we'll go to Jonah.
Depending on who you ask, I am still Catholic based on some of the comments that we get. I'm not sure we're still on the list, but I think I'm Catholic.
Trying anyway.
Yeah, we've been called heretics and all that regularly, but so I'm Craig. I'm one of the hosts of the Uncharted Catholic Men. We've been doing this for about a year now.
Yep.
We just surpassed 200 episodes. We do about 2 episodes a week. I'm a husband and father of 9. Been married for 22 years, something like that. And there was just a lot of things going on that led me to do this podcast. We're going to talk about some of those things today, and it's kind of developed a community that I sort of thought existed out there, but until we started talking about, I didn't know if it existed or not. So we're here to kind of talk about those things that are very common, but most of us just kind of deal with in silence or the confessional.
Cool. Jonah?
And I'm Jonah. I'm a husband and father as well. I've been married for around 13 years and have 4 kids. And I grew up as a regular Novus Ordo Catholic, and I thought I was a traditional Catholic until really we started doing this podcast. And I was like, wow, I'm much more in the middle than I thought I was, I guess, on a lot of issues. And the podcast has been great, and I'm very thankful that Craig asked me to join him on this journey, and that's what it really is.
I persisted.
I do just want to point out that there's been some astute observations in the chat. Craig represents the visible church and Jonah is the invisible church, a metaphor for the mystical body of Christ. Look at you guys.
We're here to serve.
So
That's so funny.
how did you guys wind up making the podcast together? So you're present in the same room together. So evidently, I don't know this, but I assume that this is not the first time that you guys have been in the same room together at the same time.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah. We started. I had been after Jonah for a while. We've been friends for a while, and we started having conversations, and then we needed to start recording. I show my face. I don't say much more about who I am. Jonah is in the witness protection program.
And we happened to move to the same town, and really we started going fishing together, and that's kind of how it all started, I guess, as far as us talking about things.
Yeah.
And
A lot of
Just
good
like,
stories start
you
from
know,
fishing.
it's true. Jesus went fishing with his disciples, and undoubtedly they talked about women and everything else, and just that's kind of how we got started, just going fishing and talking, and we realized we'd struggled and had issues with a lot of different aspects of being Catholic, and that's really how it kind of all started.
Yeah, so we may have been, and I just realized this, but because maybe my brain is filling in the cracks. We've been talking a lot about how you guys have been addressing like an audience that really like has kind of been invisible up until your podcast. In plain terms, what are these things that you guys were kind of like, hey, wait, we can't be the only people thinking this. thinking what? What exactly is it? I don't think we've said it exactly in plain terms.
So Catholics trying to be faithful in the sexual matters for the most part, although it's certainly broader that and just general relationship type struggles that we have. But I would say specifically trying to be a faithful Catholic when it comes to your sexuality, when it comes to birth control, NFP, abstinence, the sexual sins that I think most of us struggle with in large part because we're abstaining or whatever. Those are really the issues that we, in part because I came to the conclusion that it's so impossible to follow all the rules. At least it was for me.
And for me too.
That I thought either this is an impossible process that no one can really live out, and we should warn those that aren't married to avoid marriage, or something's missing here because it shouldn't be this difficult. It shouldn't be this spiritually daunting to just be a good, holy man, open to life, but yet not constantly worried about your salvation and all that. I mean, that there really was the impetus to that.
And basically need to go to confession every single week.
So, hold on though. I can think of another Catholic podcast that I would imagine has all of the answers, right? And that would be Christopher West and the Theology of the Body. So, are you telling me that there's something about kind of like the standard Catholic teaching and understanding of kind of like how marriage should work that isn't working? Is that what you're saying?
It's in the fine print, and they don't talk about it very much. But yes, there is the ideal, and then there's the reality. And I think that the reality is far more common than the ideal. At least that's, again, people don't talk about this. Like the people that talk about it that have had struggles talk about it as if they once had struggles and now they don't have those struggles. Christopher West, by his own admission, had a very bad porn and masturbation problem, I think, before he got married. I don't know if it continued into his marriage, but he would always talk about it as something in the past, and now I don't deal with that. Those that are still struggling, and most of us struggle with these things until we die, and then maybe some, it's just not real. It's just not fun to get on camera and say, "Hey, I still struggle with these things. I still got to go to confession." So yeah, that's the reality of it. And I know it's way more common now that we've kind of been out here and people send us messages and stuff. So
yeah, and I have been kind of being a little bit of a wise aleck here, saying like, wait, I thought all the answers were with the theology of the body and all that. But no, yeah, I mean, I can tell you for sure that, I grew up in the FSSP. Just Craig, you were also FSSP, right? Prior to waking up.
Yes.
But it's gotta be, it has to absolutely be something that is like a common theme. Like, I mean, I know that it is just from conversations that I had, I guess, prior to me leaving. And that kind of leads me to one of the questions that I wanted to talk about. So I had really similar concerns that you guys had, and I went one way, and you guys, well, we went on the same path for a while, but eventually we split, right? Because I don't call myself Catholic anymore. You guys certainly still do, and you guys are certainly still doing your absolute best to be the best Catholics that you can be. So I guess my question for you is, what is the difference, I guess, between like me and you, in as much as we both see the same problem, but then I think like, oh, well, okay, looks like the church isn't what I thought it was then, and you guys say like, no, it still can be what I hope it is, right? So what do you guys think is like the main difference between somebody like me and somebody like you?
It depends on the day. I mean, I will say that for all its faults and failings, it is a beautiful way to live. I mean, I do love that. Our sexuality is a very much a regular part of our life. I know my wife's fertility very, very well. I was very aware when our kids were all conceived, most of them. um, I mean, in being I mean, we definitely have kids that we would not have had we not been sort of using NFP, and we just cut corners, and we got pregnant when we weren't trying to, and those are blessings. So I I see all of that is more than just coincidences. I do feel like these are blessings from God, and even the struggles that kind of gave rise to this podcast, even the podcast itself, I would say in many ways has affirmed for me that there's something divine going on here, and that the sort of the cross that I went through for a long time was for a purpose. And so it sort of reinforces for me that there is someone bigger behind all of this. And when I start to think, okay, what are my alternatives? Nothing else seems in any way better. Yes, could you go somewhere else and be fine using birth control and all that? I don't really want that. Like, that has its own problems. So I love the core of Catholicism. I love the relationship that we have with our spouses, marital debt notwithstanding. I mean, I love the core of what we have as Catholics, but I believe that that core has value, and that there's just something that needs to be. I think it needs to be addressed or clarified, or because I just don't think it's meant to be nearly impossible to follow out faithfully. I know people will tell us, well, this is just God's way of keeping you humble, and you go to confession because you have a constant excuse to go to confession or whatever. And yeah, I just don't think that God uses potentially mortal sins to keep us humble. I mean, that's not a real satisfying answer either. So I feel like we're here for a purpose. I think God is part of this, and so I think that's only gotten stronger as we've gone through this process and talked to people, and
And for me personally, even though I've struggled with these things, I just always trust in the mercy of God, and I think the sacraments of the church bring me closer to God, and Eucharistic adoration again brings me closer to God. So I see the good that's in the church, and I'm not afraid of things that could be wrong, as far as like my faith in the Catholic Church isn't just a house of cards. Like, it's built on a solid foundation, because even if things are wrong, I can always go back to the fact that God's mercy is there and God loves all of us. And it's kind of like, I think the Jewish faith of 2,000 years ago was a stepping stone towards the Catholic Church. I think the Catholic Church could again be another stepping stone towards a further increase in truth and in our understanding of God. And that's, I guess, how I look at things.
Hey, I like that a lot. I want to pull up just a few brief comments before we get too far away from the topic. But my friend Daniel says, yes, these pious souls who proclaim their victories portray an unrealistic public image. And I'm afraid that that's exactly what the entire Christopher West project is. And that's so mean. Like, I need to donate to his podcast or something. Like, I am so mean to him. But
I'm a patron, and I can't figure out how to get undone, so I still give him $10 a month.
That's really funny, actually.
Like, honestly, I feel like Wendy seems like a very genuine person, but that feels like the only genuine person on the podcast, in my opinion.
And Anton also said something saying, everything asked for, referring to NFP and all that, it's possible, but the cost is too high. That was actually the next question that I had too, was, okay, so, measuring the viscosity of cervical mucus or whatever the Creighton method involves, it's, scientifically rigorous, but so what? And now I know so what, but I'm asking it to set up the question. What are the costs of following the church's teachings on marital sexual ethics to a T. I'm certain that the costs are not only a little bit of lost time due to scientific rigor, but tell me, what are those costs?
How much time we got?
As much as you need, as much as you need.
Yeah, I mean, that was really the tipping point for me. I was like, yes. I mean, could I live out Christopher West's model? I suppose if I was willing to devote all of my spiritual and mental bandwidth to this, gave up all my hobbies, spent very little time with my children, and just was basically a monk in between, NFP charting or whatever. I guess it's possible, but you spend, okay. For example, when you're using NFP, our wives never get to enjoy sexual intimacy when their bodies are naturally telling them this is the time. Like, they don't get to enjoy that. I mean,
according to the strict rules.
Yeah, I mean, if we're focused on nature, natural law, what are our bodies telling us? What is this theology of the body? Well, they don't talk about that. Like, that seems like that should matter. There is the fact that, even unless you are super, super rigorous, you're going to have surprise pregnancies. That is not an insignificant matter. Both the pregnancy for the woman, even if it's a healthy pregnancy, is a great undertaking. Plus, you are now responsible for this new human person, and as Catholics, we believe it's our job to hopefully get them to heaven. That's a big burden. Like, it feels like we bring life into the world somewhat flippantly and casually as Catholics, because it's not like you go off the pill because, okay, we want to have a child now. I think a lot of us just sort of end up pregnant, and which is fine. Yes, we welcome these children in, but procreation tends to be, I would say, a lot less intentional than I would like it to be, and I think our children would like it to be. The family itself, I mean, we've been talking about this a lot lately. Like, I have 9 kids. I'm still changing diapers. I've been changing diapers for 20 now. I have toddlers running around. My teenagers don't really get as much of me as they probably deserve. Like, the family itself, the kids, there's an enormous sacrifice that's shared by the whole family. Maybe that's good. I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not here to complain about all that, but there is a price to be paid for this life, both between the couple and within the family itself, that I think just gets glossed over too much.
Or the cost that can happen in the relationship if there are health issues for the woman, and say, like, it'd be too risky for her to have another child. Or if the couple just economically can't afford another child and they're just supposed to suck it up for the rest of their marriage, and that's ignoring the unity aspect of the sexual act. Mm-hmm. And eventually that sort of thing can just erode a relationship if there isn't any sort of intimacy present.
Yeah, I'm going to speculate for a moment and ask you guys if you speculate similarly to me. I suspect that there are a not insignificant amount of, I'll say traditional Catholic marriages, because I think that trads are probably more likely to actually be following Catholic sexual ethics than non-trads. I think that there's a non-insignificant percentage of Catholic marriages, trad Catholic marriages, that are deeply unhappy for the exact reasons that you just outlined. I'm not going to hazard a guess at what percentage, but I will speculate and say that I suspect that if we compared marriages where procreation was more intentional versus marriage where procreation was less intentional, I'm going to assume that, not insignificantly, the marriages where procreation is less intentional are those marriages will be rockier. They'll be less happy in those marriages. You guys are kind of in the thick of this. You know, I know that you guys get people contacting you to talk about this stuff. Am I close here? Is my intuition? Is it reflected in in the conversations that you guys have been having? Yeah. What do you think about all that?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, in that I think that people that are trying to live out, I would say, sort of the more traditional view of it, NFP or not, who are not engaging in any other acts when you can't engage in the conjugal act, all suffer immensely, and the marriages, I think, are going to definitely have a lot of those difficult aspects to them. The people that we hear from that don't labor under that tend to be people that rightly or wrongly have started incorporating other acts or something into their marriages.
Okay.
And I would say it's difficult to get stats on the trads. Like, they're not going to admit when they do something wrong or that they don't enjoy it. So they would be more likely to say that there is supposed to be suffering in marriage or suffering in life. And so it's difficult to really know. I have no doubt there's suffering, but I don't know to what extent.
Yeah, maybe a better way to think about this is because I think that you're exactly correct about. I highly doubt that we would ever find people following Catholic sexual ethics to a T admitting that it's making their marriages worse. I really doubt that we would find anybody who admits that. But I do think it would be interesting if we could look at of all of the couples who used to follow it and then stopped following it and started incorporating other acts, how many of those reported that their marriages improved and that and that their wives were happier with it. I wonder what percentage of Catholic couples would report that. Do you guys have any kind of insight there? Do you find that more people are saying, yes, incorporating other acts did improve my marriage? Or are you finding that people are saying, no, as soon as we stopped following Catholic sexual ethics, my marriage fell apart even worse?
Well, I haven't talked to all of them, but every person that has talked to us universally said our marriage got better. To the extent that we had one person talk to us recently, I believe they were, they've been married for a while. I think they talked about their 10-year-old child came up to them and says, "What's going on? You guys are so much happier now." So the kid observed it.
And it was as an adult. The child came back and said, you guys are really going through a tough period of time. When I was about 10 years old, what was happening then and what changed? And the mom went on a long spiel about it involved incorporating these other acts.
Yeah.
Wow. And and it's funny because there's people that use other acts that you would never know that they did it. Mm-hmm. There's people who talk to and they're like, well, yeah, that's the only way we get through it.
100%.
So we had just to give you an example, we had a common friend we had sort of the conversation about how often do you fall into solo and you have to go to confession for that. And he had this long-standing...
Oh, it's a hell of a streak. Like, I mean, an impressive streak like Cal Ripken Jr. sort of baseball streak, where you're like, holy crap, like, that's incredible.
We were like, this is not... like, this guy is like superhuman. Like, we were ready to erect a monument to this guy.
Yeah, we were
superhuman
and everything.
Well, then we came to find out that they use some of these things in between. And, well, that explains.
That makes sense.
Okay, there you go. Yep. Yeah, I do. I would find it very odd for something mortally sinful to cause such love, right? Like I find it so weird to think that something that has seemingly no downsides and only increases the love between a man and his wife would send them to hell if they died without confessing that. There's something about that just seems very wrong.
And that's part of the issue, is that depending on which priest you talk to, you get a variety of answers. You could either be going to hell or it could be okay. And there's not a clear answer. And that's one of the things we talk about.
Okay. So this might be a really good topic for us to kind of stay on. And is it clear? Because the way that I grew up, it was clear. But real quick before we go there, Daniel asks, have Craig and Jonah met with priests who have had a balanced view on sexual ethics? It seems a common stance in many areas. I know of both conservative and moderate priests. And the question wasn't addressed to me. The only priests that I knew on any kind of personal level were FSSP priests. So the answer there is going to be none of them would have had deviant, non-orthodox views. But what about you guys? Do you guys know any priests who would be a little bit more accepting of, like, I guess, less orthodox views here?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't want to misrepresent him. I mean, we've had priests on our show that, to me, gave a softer view of it. But yeah, I mean, I've talked to, I mean, okay, so stepping back a second, I never gave a second thought. Like, I thought this was just gospel, that you don't engage in these other acts.
Me too.
I took for granted it had to have been written down clearly in the catechism somewhere, because they sure spoke authoritatively about it. So I didn't give it a second thought until we really started doing this podcast, and the question came up. I'm like, well, I'll pull out the catechism. I'll find the answer. Well, then there was no answer there. So we started looking into it and talking to priests. And yes, I mean, priests have told me that there's sort of the technical answer, and then there's the real answer, and they don't chide you over it. Some will. I mean, if you go into an FSSP confessional, I think I know what the answer is going to be. We've extended an invitation to Father Ripperger. I kind of know what his answer will be, but I don't want to speak for him. But
when you say that you've extended an invitation to him, was this recently sent, or was this sent a while ago and you still haven't heard back?
Within the last few weeks.
2 weeks, I think.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed, because that's a conversation that I would love to see happen. I would love to speak to Father Ripperger, frankly. I don't think he'd agree to...
Father, we got someone that wants to talk to you.
I would love that. Let's talk a little bit about... So I grew up, and it was gospel. Craig, you grew up, and I mean, until you looked into it, it was gospel. The way that you phrase that, though, makes it sound like it's maybe not gospel. Tell me more about that.
So we just did episode 200 about a week and a half ago, something like that. And what you'll find is that the catechism, at least, there's a very clear section on masturbation, 2352. It's actually one of the most clear chapters. Oh, well, it's got its own problems, but it very clearly deals with that topic. And then you've got other sections of the catechism that talk about the conjugal act itself, but there's nothing in there, the catechism, and this is not just us. I mean, Christopher West has acknowledged in his books that there's not a definitive
magisterial teaching.
Right. Quite honestly, the closest that you'll find is there was a couple of, I think, speeches that Pope Pius XII gave back in the 1950s, where he talked about these degenerate acts. But that was certainly not even an encyclical. Those were just letters. But notably, there was plenty of opportunities in Humani Vitae, Vatican II, to cite to that, and they never got cited. So strangely enough, it's never really spelled out. Now, some people will say, well, the teaching that you can't separate the unitive and procreative act is clear enough that you should know that applies to those acts. Well, I don't know why you need a section on masturbation then, because I think you could apply the same standard to that. So why did they feel it was necessary to specifically address that issue? It would have been very, very easy in the catechism, either within 2352 or elsewhere, to just specifically say any use of the sexual faculty outside of marital intercourse is wrong. They didn't do that. Like, that's not anywhere in the catechism. It's just not written anywhere.
And people will say then that it is mutual masturbation, but then that would again fall under 2352, where there are exceptions that make or situations that can make you less culpable. And I would think that, you know, having regular intimacy within marriage is certainly a situation that you would get conditioned to, and possibly then your level of sin would be lessened. And it's not like you would go into the confessional and say, "Listen, bless me, Father, for I've sinned. I masturbated my wife." You know, like, I mean, you're not going to say it like that. You know,
right.
like
There's not even a name for it.
It's not masturbation. You know, like it's not that.
I am continually shocked at how much pseudo-dogmatic teaching is actually nowhere close to even being pseudo-dogmatic. So, you know, what we were just talking about right now with the kind of like other acts being one of them. I just did like an episode of my like non-live show on cremation. And growing up, for me, I grew up weird, but cremation was like a settled, like, look, you don't do it, period, end of discussion. Look, it's not dogma, but it's just such an ingrained part of tradition that there's absolutely no wiggle room here. And then you look more into it, and that's not exactly the case. There's actually very few things that are actually like super squarely nailed down in Catholicism. I'm saying this as if it's all definitive. Do you guys agree with me that it's shockingly few things are actually like dogmatic?
Well, I think that's true. You know, so what's so interesting is, number one, it's not clearly spelled out anywhere, and the places that it more or less are not really in infallible type documents. So do you have to rely upon it? Is it authoritative? Is it infallible? And then, you know, you sort of got the next step beyond that. You have this primacy of conscience that is sort of a new thing to me too. I grew up thinking, you know, your duty to form your conscience is to do what the heck the church says. Like, right, that is your conscience, right? Because you say, well, my conscience disagrees with what the church says here, and they always say, well, you clearly haven't properly formed your conscience. But, you know, so yeah, I mean, there aren't a lot of dogmatic things, and I don't think this is one of them. I don't even know that the teaching on contraception is infallible. I guess it depends who you ask, but
yeah. So I guess here's another question for me. Are you guys as frustrated as I am with the lack of clarity in these things? I remember being Catholic and thinking that one of the best things about being Catholic is the clarity. And then I lost all that clarity as I started looking for clarity. I find that incredibly frustrating. Do you guys view it as frustrating?
So, couple thoughts on that. So a while back, we interviewed Father
Dwight Longenecker.
Dwight Longenecker. He's a former Anglican priest who I really liked that interview, and we talked about some of this stuff on there, so people ought to check that out. He gave a surprisingly, what I would say is a soft approach to this, when I kind of consider him a kind of a traditionalist. But he talked about how refreshing it was to come into Catholicism and have that clarity of moral guidance and what's expected, and how he talked about just the complete mess in the Anglican Church when he left. So I'm sensitive to that, and I don't really want to live in that kind of chaos. But the lack of, and some people have said, well, the lack of clarity is there. It's actually a good thing. It gives people some room to do this if it's right for them without the church having to definitively declare yes or no. And in some ways, we've been a little, I've at least been unsettled on drawing attention to this issue because maybe they will clarify it. I don't know.
Well, that's the goal, isn't it?
I mean, it would help. It would help. I mean, first of all, like we said, there are priests and non-priests that will give different answers about this, and I know that there are couples that labor immensely under this. Like we have throughout our marriage too. I know the pain that goes into life when you're trying to follow these rules, and if it's not necessary, if it may not be necessary, it hurts me immensely that people don't have to suffer that maybe don't have to suffer that. So that does bother me about the lack of clarity. But and I think everyone we talk to that has sort of incorporated these into their lives doesn't do it without a certain amount of trepidation in the back of their mind, because you don't know, like, what if we're wrong? Like, what if we die and we find out these are all on the list and sorry, you're going to hell now because you didn't mention in the confessional? Like, I don't care how confident you are about these things, you never eliminate the doubt in your mind when there's a lack of clarity about it. So that I think is a real problem.
And this won't be reassuring at all. But I still feel the same way, even as somebody outside of the church, where it's like the lack of clarity is unsettling. Though I will say this, I remember the day that I kind of realized, like, I guess I'm really not Catholic anymore, and I expected to feel I get whatever the opposite of peace is. I thought I expected to feel a huge, overwhelming sense of like dread or whatever, and I didn't. I felt a sense of peace, but not the same kind of peace that me kind of being, and I'm only describing myself this way, but naively certain about Catholicism. I felt a peace in my kind of naive certainness about Catholicism. This peace that I felt once I was like, I guess I'm not Catholic anymore, was a very different kind of peace. It was the kind of peace that you feel after you fail the exam. Like, you know that you bombed, but you're like, you know what? It's over. Whatever happens, happens. That's kind of the peace, and I don't even know if peace is the right word, but that's how I felt. And I realized that I just kind of had to like rest in the end. Hey, look, like I'm giving this my best shot. Like, I'm reading the books that I'm supposed to read. And if I can't believe it, like, then I just have to hope that God is going to be forgiving. And if he's not, then I guess I had no chance from the beginning anyway. So do you think that you guys, was any of what I said right there relatable to you guys who, even though you're not outside the church, you're perhaps outside what is considered orthodox? Did any of that relate to you guys? Or am I kind of crazy? I might be crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I would answer it a little bit different. Personally, I feel very, very comfortable with the personal conclusions that I've come to. It's not without some uncertainty, but it's sort of like you give your very best shot, you put it all on in the field, and you still lose the game, close game. Like, you're going to lose those games, but you don't have to live with a lot of regret because you gave it your all. Like, you gave it your best, and you just couldn't match up the other side. Like, I think there's a peace that goes with that.
Yes.
I'm very much at peace with where I'm at on this personally, because it's not like I've been married a year and struggling and whatever, I'm bailing. Like, I have 20 years of just real lived experience, prayer. I've secretly gone to counseling. I mean, I've done my due diligence, and I feel very comfortable with the decision that I've come to. I do have some trepidation about talking about this because if I'm wrong, I don't want other people to rely on us. I don't want to be responsible for someone else's, bad decisions. If things that we talk about or suggest on this channel may be leading people astray, and we get called heretics all the time. I mean,
somehow I do too.
Yeah.
Which is like, you realize I'm not Catholic, right? But
yeah.
Anyway.
Those comments by and large go over you, but
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong. Like, maybe it is. Maybe we're just supposed to suffer through this, and maybe we are weak. I don't know. I don't think that's it, but I just.
And for me personally, and I'm not a very scrupulous person, but it was always in the back of my mind, just how it should be. And it wasn't until we started talking to people about the primacy of conscience that I really did gain some of that peace, kind of that you were talking about. Just that if your conscience tells you that it's okay, then it can't be ignored, essentially. And, when you see, like, for me personally, how much improvement occurred within our marriage, it's difficult to ignore that that sort of thing. I don't know.
The other thing I would add to it is this. I mean, we've got kind of a community of people around us, and it's pretty much all guys. I mean, we don't exclude women, but guys apparently spend a lot more time worrying about this stuff than most ladies. And what we have found, and this is true in my marriage, when my wife and I have had these conversations, she's like, "What do you think?" Like, she kind of defers to me, and that's that's another added responsibility, because if you do start to go into these things, you're now your spouse, you're affecting your spouse, because if you're wrong, you don't want something bad to happen to them either. So that is really why we when we kind of found ourselves in this issue, particularly in this podcast, we felt it was so important, because we know that there's just so many people out there that are struggling, whether they know it or not, are struggling with this issue. And I don't think a lot of priests appreciate what's really going on, because you just don't get this in a 2-minute confession. Bless me, Father, I whatever. I don't think most priests, they personally can't relate to this, and they just don't get this from people. And that's kind of why we continue to talk about it, because we really think it needs attention.
And then too, as far as if it is a sinful behavior, there aren't many other sins that bring people together.
Yeah.
Where's
the harm?
Yeah.
Right.
Where's the harm in it?
Yeah. So I can imagine a broad range of religious practices that could cause problems between spouses, right? So here's something. I know that for certain religions, like, they can only have marital relations during certain times of the month. And I guess that's not super dissimilar from NFP. I know that for other religions, there has to be a sheet in between the couple. I know that for other religions, they have to be wearing special garments while they're doing it. And I can imagine any one of those things being problematic. My question for you, when I say problematic, I mean it could cause strife between a husband and wife. My question for you is this. Would your view be that you have very little confidence that anything is truly wrong if abandoning that practice actually makes the relationship between a husband and a wife better? Or can you imagine a scenario in which something could still be wrong even if it did make the relationship between the husband and the wife better? And I only ask this because I'm trying to play a little bit of devil's advocate, because I agree with you guys too much on too many things. So I have to be a little devil advocate here. So is there any kind of practice that you could imagine would still be wrong, even if removing it increased the happiness in the marriage?
Yeah, I mean, part of it I can't imagine a situation now. I mean, if a couple's doing consensual stuff, and let's say they want to start swinging and stuff like that, and they're both happy and whatever. I mean, I think there's harm to that relationship, even if they're both completely consensual and enjoying it and all that kind of stuff. But
that's where you went.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a good one. It's a good one.
It is. That is a good one. I can see the harm in that too.
Okay, and what is the harm?
Limit it to the couple. Yeah. What's the harm?
Yeah, just to be clear, like what is the harm that swinging could be about? I'm fairly certain I know where you're going, but
I think you're just introducing the opportunity for infidelity, or now suddenly this person you find more satisfying than your spouse or whatever. I mean, you're just inviting strife into your marriage, or infidelity and this and that, when you start to introduce other people into that, even if at the time it all seems hunky-dory and maybe this particular relationship didn't cause that. But I do believe that, monogamy has a lot of, I mean, it's very functional and has a lot of value. So when you talk about a couple, and it's stuff that's between them and only them, it's hard for me to imagine something that is what do I say, wrong, or no, not wrong, but harmful to them, or wrong and not harmful. But I can't think of anything unless it's just purely spiritual. I mean, we posed this question to Christopher West. He heard the question on his podcast. He read the question and tried to answer
about other acts, not swinging.
Yeah,
right. That's what I was going to say. Is I don't think that had to do with swinging, right? That had to do with.
Yeah, I specifically said, you have said that the church clearly teaches that other acts are wrong, and I said, number one, where does the church say that? And number two, aside from the sin, what's the harm to the relationship if the couple does that? Those are my two questions. Number one, he said, well, the church says it all over the place that it's wrong. Couldn't even cite to a particular document. I know it doesn't. I mean, I haven't found it. So he really couldn't answer where it's found. And number two, he's like, oh, well, if it's sinful, it's got to be wrong. Like, it's got to be harmful if it's a sin. If we say it's a sin, there's got to be a harm there. And there's sort of this, circular reasoning and so I have yet to see the harm. And we ask people, like, if there's something that we're missing, or these couples are missing, tell us. We'll come on and we'll talk to you. You'll have the pulpit and opportunity to save all these couples from a train wreck that they don't see coming. But I have yet to see it.
Agreed. But let me pose, hopefully, a thought-provoking question to you.
Yeah.
This is completely hypothetical, but imagine two Catholic couples, and just to make my case the strongest possible case it can possibly be, both of these couples are infertile, so it's impossible for kids to arise from either of these couples' marriages. And imagine that both of these couples were having tons and tons of marital problems, and these two couples wound up swinging together, just like the four of them. And they, stick with me, and imagine that it made both of their marriages so much better, just so much better. And then they called you, and they said, what's the harm? So I guess my first question would be, would you still view that as wrong? Is your general aversion the same thing as, like, is it a hard and fast rule, or is it just a generalization of which there will be exceptions, and the exceptions are fine? And then if it's not just some kind of generalization with plenty of exceptions, then how would your answer regarding what's the harm of this situation be different than Christopher West's answer to what is the harm for other acts? You see, trying to set up a symmetry.
Here's what I would say is a believer. I mean, if you're not a believer, I guess I don't know what the harm would be, but we have the 6 commandments. So the 6 commandments is thou shalt not commit adultery. It is I trust the 10 commandments. That would violate the sixth commandment, I think, consensual or not. That's an adulterous relationship. This stuff doesn't, I mean, I don't know which commandment it violates. It's between the husband and wife. I mean, it's not violating any of the commandments. Now, that doesn't mean that the only things that are wrong are things that specifically violate a commandment, but I think it is significant whether something violates a 10 commandment or not. I mean, if you skip mass on Sundays, I don't know that there's going to be tangible harm to you, but it's a commandment. I mean, as Catholics, we believe that you follow this, and if you don't do it, it's wrong. But when you don't even have a commandment, and you have no harm, and you have no express authoritative rule, it begs the question, like, if we're telling people not to do this, there better be a damn good reason for it. There better be some very, not even a little harm, like some very significant harm awaiting them to tell them not to do this, because we know the harm that it alleviates and the goodness that it seems to bring to marriages. So you know, I don't know how else to look at it.
So again, I am the embodiment of all four of these people, and the four of us are speaking to you at once.
Yeah.
We are not breaking the sixth commandment because a necessary condition for, and I'm not saying that I believe this, but just stick with me. A necessary condition for adultery is some form of lying or like withholding information from your spouse. But things that you do with your spouse, like as a group activity, definitionally cannot be adultery because there's no breaking of any trust. Okay. For that reason, what the four of us do together on Wednesday evenings at 7 p.m. after we go and play board games or whatever, that is going to be can't be breaking the sixth commandment. And even let's do number 9 is coveting wives, right? 9 or 10? Covet
9.
Wives. 9. Yeah, because 10 is covet thy neighbor's goods.
Right. Yeah.
And it's also not coveting your neighbor's wife. You're not trying to get your neighbor's wife to be your wife. You're just like no more than a double date where the four of you go hiking. You're not coveting your neighbor's wife when you go hiking with the four of you. And likewise with this group activity, you're also not coveting your neighbor's wife. It's just a group activity that the four of you do together.
I would say you're still violating the vows that you made at your wedding. Like, I think you agreed to be bound to an exclusive sexual relationship as part of the vows. That I think probably applies there. That I don't think that there's any vow that you take that wanders into this territory. I don't know.
I couldn't really give them much advice other than to go to confession, because that's kind of like our mantra. If you're in doubt, just go to confession. And, if it works for them, I don't know what to say about that. But I don't know. I don't think it's quite the same as the other acts.
Yeah. The other thing I would say is this. That I think one of the differences is that the extreme example of swinging is like it's something you can do, but it's not like of necessity. If you're a married couple, like, this is your only option. Your only option is abstaining or these other acts to be sexually intimate with each other if you can't engage in the conjugal act. Like, it's this or nothing. It's not like it's this or this or this or this. Like, you don't have an assortment of options. You have this, or you have all the suffering and everything that goes with abstinence. So to me, that sort of is important to distinguish, because literally this comes for every couple that's in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
So is your argument something like, hey, look, all of these other acts are actually evil. It's just that they're less evil than the evil of like strife between a man and his wife because of abstinence? Like, is that the argument? Because if it's not, and you'll see where I'm going with this, if that's not the argument, if the argument is something along the lines of, no, there's actually nothing intrinsically immoral with consenting adults having parties together, then perhaps I would fail to see how that doesn't apply to swinging. You know what I mean?
You want to try? You want to take a stab, Jonah?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think the swinging is immoral, but I think that sexual acts between a husband and wife are pretty protected behavior, and so I know where you're going with the swinging, but I don't think it's quite the same, because, like Craig said, you basically, marriage is a commitment where you are only going to be with that one other person for the rest of your life, and so
we've had some discussions recently. The last episode we did was with John. I won't name his last name, but
I watched that one this morning, and I honestly felt like I had to take a shower after it. That's how I felt.
That was a wild one. But some of the points we made in the comments were people like, well, if you allow NFP, you have to allow birth control, and I'm like, I mean,
allow it. Do it, cowards.
Yeah, I mean, it's if the price of these conclusions is we have to revisit birth control or swinging or whatever, so be it. But I think using the fact that, well, we don't want to be like to reverse the birth control thing would require an about face, because that teaching is very clear. Whether it's right or wrong, I think people can debate that, but that's out there. Like, that's on the billboard. Like, we'd have to explain why we now hold something different. This is something that I don't think is really spelled out at all. But if the price of, I don't think we should refuse to look at this issue because we're afraid that it may reveal that we're wrong about something else. I think that's sort of what's going on. I think we should get over that.
And I feel like a ban on other acts suggests that there's touching that's not permitted between a husband and wife, and I just don't buy that either.
No disagreements here, none at all. I've put you guys in the hot seat for long enough, so now it's somebody else's turn to put you in the hot seat. But you're still in the hot seat, so you're not getting out of this yet. Cade has a question for you. What sexual and we've kind of been talking a little bit about this, but what Catholic sexual ethics do you still hold to? So we covered swinging. Swinging is still immoral. What are some other things? What else did the church get right?
Well, we don't support birth control. We don't really support solo activity. What else is there?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm fine not using birth. Even if the church said birth control is okay, I would not jump on that bandwagon. I think natural family planning in conjunction with some leniency on other acts is great. I think that makes a lot of sense. It makes sense
because then you can also try to get pregnant, or when to abstain. I mean, it's the missing piece of the puzzle, I think, as far as a happy Catholic marriage goes.
Yeah, I'm not here. I'm fine with the church's teaching. I don't have a strong feeling one way or another because I wouldn't use it even if it was allowed. I will say this, I have a lot of questions about the origins of our teachings, and whether it's solo activity or whatever. It seems to stem back to Onan. I think there's all kinds of problems with that line of thinking. But I will say, if we're going to maintain, let's say, that you can't use birth control and you can't engage in solo activity, 2352, and if that is going to, both of those are mortal sins to me, and I'm fine. I'm saying, okay, fine, I'll grant you that. To me, that all the more points towards other acts being potentially permissible, because otherwise you are just creating, I don't know, a situation that I have yet to meet a man that can do that perfectly. I don't think they exist.
I suspect that you're right.
John notwithstanding, but
well, I mean, yeah, I mean, there's all, then you get the traditional point of view that uses abusive tactics, which is just sick, and that's, I don't know, that's bothersome as well.
Sorry, what do you mean by abusive tactics? Are you talking about men abusing their wives or something? Or
yeah, sort of like to the marital debt,
Yeah.
or just even to make them scrupulous about not.
It's a sin when you deny
being
me.
interested in being intimate.
Yeah. Whenever I want it, you have to put out, and if you don't, that's a sin, an immortal sin too, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's a fair traditional point of view. Like this guy on Twitter gave me a hard time because I made a marital debt joke, and he's like, "What? Are you even Catholic? Like Catholics are supposed to believe." It's like, nah, I don't really agree with the marital debt in any way.
You guys sound so much like me that sometimes I forget that you guys are still Catholic.
Maybe you're more Catholic than you think.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong. And that is, no, I'm serious. And Catholics get so mad at me for saying this, but in a lot of ways, I am still, in the technical ways, I am still Catholic, right? Because I'm baptized, I've never been excommunicated. I've got the indelible mark on my soul that not even excommunication would remove, even if I did get excommunicated. If I wanted to receive Holy Communion on this coming Sunday, literally all I'd have to do is show up at confession, confess my sins, and then I can receive communion. I'm just a bad Catholic, if you look at it that way.
Join the club.
But my point is that a bad Catholic is still a Catholic. And then I'm also Catholic in a lot of my kind of just hey, look, it's my culture. It's how I was raised. And there's nothing that I can do to change that. So you're not wrong. That's my whole point, was to say you're not wrong. Mm-hmm. I wound up derailing this. We had a really good transition earlier and we lost it. But Daniel wants to know how both of you regard Cardinal McElroy's views, i.e., sexual sins should really be dialed back to, in most cases, venial sins. And I imagine, too, that the assumption here is consensual sexual sins should all be. I don't think anybody is saying that raptus is the Latin word for it, should be dialed back. I think that's obvious, right? What do you guys think?
Well, it kind of makes sense as far as you have to have 3 conditions for it to be a mortal sin. Full knowledge, full consent, and oh gosh,
knowledge, consent, and a grave matter.
Yep, and a grave matter. That's right. And I think in most cases, whether it's solo or with your spouse, those are done out of almost just a desire for, I don't know if it's unity or intimacy, but it's kind of I think it's considered to be a grave sin because it involves obviously creating humans, but there's also a clear endpoint. There's not a clear endpoint for gluttony. You can eat a lot, but not many people are going to go to confession for gluttony. But when sexual sins happen, people know it, and so they get scrupulous about them, I think.
Well, yeah, that was really what kind of got me on this journey, because everything gets attributed to concupiscence, and maybe it is. I don't know what Adam's sex life and what his sexual urges were before the fall, whatever.
Oh, wait, have you never read Augustine? Do you not know that Adam never experienced any kind of sexual attraction to Eve before the fall?
Yeah, that's
hard to believe.
I have a script for a video about that. That's the only reason I remember this.
Yeah, someone just sent us an article today that kind of traces sort of the development of our prudishness with sexuality back to, was it the Hittites or something? And of course, Augustine, just look at his past. I think it's hard to say that he just was uninfluenced by his sort of shameful past. But, we have these drives. Is there a drive that's stronger than the sexual drive? I don't think there is. And if it's here by concupiscence, I sure the hell didn't choose it. And if it's not, God put it here. And if all these sexual sins are such a serious matter, it appears that God set us up really towards hell, because you have to exert extraordinary effort and discipline not to fall into one of these things, lust or whatever. So it's really hard for me to look at how people, like, I don't have the same problem staying away from adultery and making it to church on Sunday or killing people. Like we're not naturally predisposed. Most of us are not predisposed to any of those kinds of things. Every healthy man and woman is predisposed towards, sexual expression and experience, and almost all of those, according to, say the traditionalists, lead to illicit things that are will jeopardize your soul. I have a hard time believing that a good God does that to us, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
Hey, maybe the Gnostics were right, and there's actually two gods, one of which is good and the other which is evil, and maybe all of those urges come from the evil god. I guess we'll find out when we die. But
I'm open to anything being possible at this point in
time. I've got a question for you from my friend Rosemary, if that's all right. Why do you guys think that condoms are immoral? That seems similar to other acts.
I guess that I would just base that on the catechism, which the tribes will say is not a binding document, but it says that the actual conjugal act must be procreative and unitive. So that's really my basis for that. And it's a weak answer, but that's my answer.
Well, I would respond both personally and on the letter of the law. So, personally, I don't know why it would be wrong, but I will defer to what the church says on this. But kind of getting to what we talked about, like the church does talk about the sacredness of the conjugal act, and I kind of accept that. Like I think if we treated the conjugal act as sacred and we don't mess with that, and you can even accept the story of Onan's demise as sort of misusing the conjugal act. Okay. If you treat the conjugal act as sacred by God, and then you're not engaging in the conjugal act, hey, we're not going to touch that. We're just going to be doing things that don't involve intercourse. I think that is different, both in terms of the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. I think it would be my answer.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions. I wanted to kind of dig in a little deeper there, but in the spirit of getting to more questions and not keeping you guys here until midnight, I'm going to move on. Okay. But let's put a pin in that for a future conversation one day.
Sure. Yeah.
My friend Cade would be interested in hearing your guys' takes on Catholic sexual ethics as regards to homosexuality. Is this going to be the same as condoms, where it's just kind of like, hey, look, it's what the church says?
It's just not something we cover. I don't know.
I mean, I will say this. I mean, I struggle with what to do there. I will say I have an immense amount of compassion for people that are in that situation, because what I try to do is I try to imagine myself with my own daily, weekly struggles, just trying to faithfully live what the church requires of me within a sexual marital relationship. Like I'm not celibate, and it's hard. It gets hard to be perfect even within a very loving, long-term, stable relationship. I can't imagine what it's like to have these same kinds of desires and to, in effect, never be able to act on them or share that relationship with someone else. So I have a lot of sympathy with those people. I don't go around rah like you guys are all going to hell. Like that's not my stick.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Definitely.
So you guys don't think that gay people should be burned, for instance, burned at the stake?
I'll go on record and say, yeah, I don't think they should be burned.
Okay, that is a mortal sin for you to hold that opinion, but I will let it slide.
Add it to the list.
That's right, add it to the list.
Are you serious? That's a mortal sin to say something like that?
No,
Oh,
no,
okay, I wasn't
no.
sure. You know, now you're the trads. They never fail to surprise me.
So,
No, I mean, I think, you know, if it's like Craig said, it's just something that I've never experienced, so I don't even know what to say about it really, other than I guess everybody needs to trust in God's mercy no matter where they are in life. It doesn't matter if you're the Pope, if you're an ultra trad, if you're a Novus Ordo, everybody's trusting God's mercy, you know, and that's how I look at pretty much all sins.
yeah. Another question for you. And I'm sorry that I'm going fast. I'm just trying to get to all of them before it's, time for us to all head out. A while back, one of the guests said something about women don't talk or think about this as much as men. Did I catch that right? If they mean sex/ethics of that kind of stuff, women talk all the time. I'm going to let you see if you want to address that. Was the context, am I remembering correctly? Was the context that women don't tend to talk about that kind of stuff with men, not so much that they don't talk about it with each other? I don't know if I remember the context, but feel free to add any kind of addendums here that you want to.
Well, I think it was both in the terms of the we have very few people, women reach out to our show. We have all kinds of men, so I guess that the demographics seem to suggest that men are much more interested in these things. But I think my comment was more within the context of my own marriage. So these are things that I have spent literally years wrestling with. And I know there's other guys in our group that have spent, they're finding our podcast, they're reading books and all that. And then they kind of go talk to their wives about it, and the wives are like, I don't think twice, I don't worry at all about this. It seems to be in my marriage and others sort of in our group that the husbands in the group are really trying to dig into this and get moral clarity on it, and for one reason or another our wives just don't seem to be bothered by getting to the bottom of it. I don't know.
One thing that I can say, I guess, is that, well, I guess for number one, the reason why so many men and not women may have been contacting you, I think YouTube in general is 80% men or something, right? Just like YouTube across the board. So that may have something to do with it. But another thing too is I'll speak for my parents never really spoke to me about this kind of thing, but I can say that my dad was the kind of Catholic who was constantly reading the new apologetic book or whatever, the new Scott Hahn book. My dad got it. My mom didn't really care. My mom, I shouldn't say that she didn't care. She just didn't care for the apologetic side of things. And so I think that if my dad kind of expressed these kinds of concerns to my mom, I think that her response would be something along the lines of I trust you. I don't care. Yeah.
Yep.
And that might be a common attitude among conservative religious women. Mm-hmm. I will tell you that my wife cares a lot about I'm not going to say apologetics because she didn't grow up like I did. But my wife is not the kind of whatever you say goes, Kevin. She's Italian and therefore has a a very bold mind of her own, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But I
wish my wife was more interested in this stuff, but she's a mother of 9 kids. I mean, this is
she's busy.
Probably don't bother me with this crap, Craig. I don't know.
Yeah. I think I got through all the questions. I'll take another quick look through the chat, but and I want to get us out of here before the top of the hour, but I wanted to see if you guys wanted. So I kept you in the hot seat from my questions and from the audience questions. Do you guys want to try to put me in the hot seat? And obviously I'm being dramatic when I say the hot seat, but do you guys have any questions for me that you think that you would like me to wrestle with?
Well, I mean, I'd be curious. Do you think? Because I think you've said previously that sort of the struggle with the sexual ethics was kind of a major reason for your departure. I think one of the reasons why I, at least personally, ended up where I am now is I was former trad before I really struggled with these things. I think I was a little more open to the idea of things being wrong or needing to change. Do you think if you weren't in the sort of that traditionalist mindset when you struggle with these things or came to wrestle with these things, if you could have, you know, had a different endpoint, similar to us, in that you maybe could have incorporated some of this into that in a way that, as a traditionalist, it's just you really don't have the luxury of, you have to pick one or the other. I'm either a traditionalist or I'm going to entertain some of these things. I don't think you have the option to do both.
I'm going to repeat the question back to you because I want to make sure that I'm answering the question that you asked and not the question that I thought that you asked. So the question was something like this. Because you grew up as a traditionalist, did you feel like your faith was more rigid in the sense that it didn't allow for bending, it just broke?
Yes.
Okay. The answer to that is, so I was about to say undoubtedly yes, but I almost want to walk back the undoubtedly only because it's really hard to, like, knowing thyself is one of the hardest things to do, and then knowing thyself counterfactually is like really difficult. So like, if things were different, they would be different, but I don't really know how I would have been because it wasn't that way. But I think so. I believe so. The way that my faith was such that, like, it was very black and white, very rigid, very clear, right? And so the second that it flexed at all, it shattered, like a pane of glass rather than a piece of, like, thin plastic. So that's 100% what happened to me. And yeah. And for me, it started with a realization that my moral intuitions didn't line up with what the church was saying. And I was like, okay, well, it didn't snap immediately at that moment, right? I realized that my moral intuitions didn't line up. And then I decided I have to dig into this. But like, the more I digged into it, the more I realized, I'm like, wait, I just don't think that any of this is actually how morality works. And that's kind of how it went for me.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And one thing I will say too, at least for me, is what happened to me is going, when I was a traditionalist or recently a traditionalist, to the extent that my moral intuition on things seemed, at odds with church teaching, I was still prepared to chalk it up to concupiscence or my own inability to just conform my intellect and will to what the church teaches. Like that was sort of my attitude for a long time. But once I got into, 15, 20 years of like, I was doing everything humanly possible to try and make sense of it. And I could no longer just say, Craig, you're just a weak concupiscence filled guy. You're the problem. Like, I couldn't just resign myself to that, which is why I said something's got to be wrong here. Either our concept of God is wrong, or these teachings are wrong, or something's wrong, because I don't think it's just me and my concupiscence that's the problem here.
I mean, that sounds similar to me, right? Like, your kind of intuition that, like, it's not this can't all just be concupiscence sounds similar to my intuition of just like, hey, wait a minute, like, this stuff is supposed to be written on my heart. This stuff is not written on my heart. What's going on?
Yeah.
But I guess even though we were both raised in the FSSP, I guess you were just like a little bit more flexible than me.
Apparently, I mean, I guess hopefully God knew what he was doing, and I do strongly believe that everything that has happened, including my journey through traditionalism, was probably intended to prepare us for this weird mission that we're on. It's been a lot of fun and very, very humbling. I mean, the messages that we do get from people have been very humbling, and it really does make me believe that we're here for a reason. I think our encountering you was not just coincidental. I mean, I feel very lucky, quite honestly, to be in the position we are in now.
Mhm.
It's really a lot of fun.
It's a lot of fun. People either say we're heretics or they really support us. So
Yeah, right.
You're doing something right.
There's your black and white for you.
There you go. Well, hey, from somebody who is technically still a Catholic, but is perhaps just a very bad one, I think that we need more Craigs and Jonahs in the church. And I say that because I think that Catholic sexual ethics, I think that they're bad for marriages, right? I think that the church is in the position to be able to do a lot of good by changing a couple of relatively small rules, but for whatever reason she isn't. And I think that you guys are able to push for change in a way that I cannot. I have, for better or worse, branded myself as an outsider to the Catholic Church, as in like, hey, look, I'm significantly different, that I don't call myself Catholic anymore. You guys are still Catholic, and that gives you guys a way to change the church from within that is simply not an option to me. And that, for that reason, among other reasons, I think that your podcast is a very important one. So I'm grateful that you guys do what you do. I hope that your subscribership continues to grow. Your channel should be linked in the description down below if it's not already. But whether or not it is linked in the description down below, tell us the name of your show, where we can find you on both YouTube and Twitter and anywhere else. And also tell us what you're working on next.
So Uncharted Catholic Man is a podcast. I don't think there's anything out there even remotely similar. So if you Google it, you'll find us. The YouTube is our primary vehicle. So just YouTube Google Uncharted Catholic Man. Go to YouTube. We have an email address that anyone can message us. Go just unchartedcatholicman@gmail.com. Send us a message. We love hearing from people. Just to give you an example, we had a guy, him and his girlfriend are thinking about getting married, and they started talking about these things to the point where he was concerned about getting married. And the stuff that we talked about really gave them an opportunity to have conversations that most people don't have until way into their marriage.
That we waited to have a conversation with the wife about.
Yeah. So it's wonderful to hear those stories, and I'm glad that our content is at least generating some of those. So people email us, go to the YouTube. It has all our links in it. I think it's Uncharted Cat Man over on Twitter. We love hanging out on Twitter. That's a pretty fun place to engage with us. So yeah, just find us.
Awesome.
So, what are we working on next?
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's right. What's the next episode? 204 or whatever it's going to be next. What's coming up?
So I think we're going to spend more time digging into this other acts because we just did episode 200. I think we want to really dig into it from a variety of angles. But one of the things that I want to do an episode on is, I think, the female anatomy and the female experience in particular is a very big stumbling block for Catholic sexual ethics. The way that women are designed and the way they experience pleasure, I think in particular, is something that the Christopher Wests of the world need to contend with. So that's something that I really want to dig into next time, because I'd like to have someone explain that one to me.
And one thing that I've been working on that would really be switching gears is whether or not we're living in a simulation, and as Catholics, should we care? Because there is a lot of evidence that we are living in a simulation, and the scientists seem to rejoice in this, even though it would point to the fact there's a creator, and the religious people tend to shy away from it, even though it points to the fact there would be a creator. So we're going to have, it's going to be a great discussion, though, and interesting, I think, and thought-provoking. So that's something that I've been working on personally, but it'd be a big change in our typical subject matter, but I think it's worth thinking about.
Hey, I think after 200 and some odd episodes of Catholic sexual ethics, you've earned one episode off. And guess what? If you do another 200 and some odd episodes back on Catholic sexual ethics, you'll have earned another episode where you get to do something different. So
So I get this one shot.
Appreciate the token.
Oh, well, one until you do another 200 episodes, and then you'll have another. Think it really. You have an infinite number of non on topic episodes.
That's fair.
So you know you're fine.
Good.
On that note, I've been Kevin Non-Tradicath. I've had Craig and Jonah from the Uncharted Catholic Man podcast. This has been a fantastic episode. Thank you both so much for being on, and until next time. Guess what, everybody? We're back. And that's because we had one more question. And I just didn't want to keep Craig and Jonah forever. But they said that they have time for one more. So we're doing one more. This is our encore question.
This guy in our yeah.
Okay. So I think that this is an interesting question. And the Kevin route is kind of like the atomic route, right? Where you just kind of drop religion altogether. But there are non-Catholic Christianities that could be an option for you guys. Did you ever consider non-Catholic Christianities? And I guess in particular, did you ever consider evangelical Protestantism, which is very specific? But did you ever consider any non-Catholic Christianities?
For me personally, and during college, I did attend other services, evangelical services, Lutheran services, generally with girlfriends, girls that I was dating, but it just never felt genuine to me. And today, I would never even consider it at all, because I do find some tangible sort of connection that occurs through the sacraments, through the Eucharist, through Eucharistic adoration, that I just, you wouldn't find in any other Christian faith. And so for me, it's not even remotely a temptation. I would just rather stay Catholic and just, consider that I just continue to struggle with certain things. I guess that would be easier for me than converting to a different religion.
And I wouldn't do it over this issue either, because I this is going to open up a whole nother conversation. But I spent a lot of time listening to non-Catholic content as well, and it's not like they're living some panacea. I mean, they've got everyone's got their marital struggles. Like, it's not like they have it all. Everything's fun and joyful all the time. So I'm okay with the batch of problems we have, and I would far more rather be a Catholic if we could get some kind of leniency on this than to jump ship onto something else, because that all looks like it's just as much of a problem.
And because the strength of the Catholic faith, as far as the teaching on sexuality, is that there's no solo activity and no porn, and it's supposed to bring the husband and wife together. That is the strength of it.
Yeah.
And it's the other details that are the issue.
And is it perhaps that you both would rather fix the house that you're living in rather than go and buy a new house? Is that kind of like the attitude?
It's the devil you know and versus the one you don't. Yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah. You bought the right house
That's
the first
a great
time.
question, though.
Yeah. And you bought the right house the first time. You don't want a new house. You just want to fix the house that you're living in. That's kind of the attitude.
Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
That makes sense. Yep. Computational Theist is very grateful that we got to that question. You're welcome, Computational Theist. That was the encore question. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been Kevin Non-Tradicath. They've been the Uncharted Catholic Man podcast. And until next time.